Now let me get specifically about children here, because people bring up children all the time. They say, yeah, but what do you say about children suffering? Now, I already dealt with this in our first week together when I said, remember, the Lord said, on the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. He did not say, you will surely die in your sleep at a ripe old age of natural causes. He just said, you will die, and we've been attending funerals ever since. Adam sinned, right? And what happened is God cursed the ground, and then he removed Adam and Eve from the rejuvenating power of the tree of life, and so they began to die, because they no longer had the access to the rejuvenating power of the tree of life. So you say, well, why did children suffer? Because God cursed the ground and there's no tree of life to make them better. A lot of the suffering, physical suffering, is because of that. Obviously, a lot of other kinds of suffering is because humans hurt children, right? But again, that goes back to free will, doesn't it? But I want to point out something, and this has got to be one of the most unpopular notions of all, because people want to, and a lot of skeptics, well, children are born good. Children are not born good. Augustine said, the reason that children don't do evil isn't for lack of desire, it's for lack of ability. And sometimes, by the way, this is one of those cases where I think a video is worth 1,000 words or more, where you just begin to come to grips that children are capable of tremendous evil, often, aren't they? They may not be able to actually accomplish it because they're little, but it's not that the desire isn't there. And there's something about, I'm kind of reminded of Lord Acton's comment, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, even if the child is 6 or 8 years old. Any comments about this or thoughts? Yes, Prashanth.
The concept of being born into sin is something that really stood out to me after I had my child. He's about to turn 15 months old, but before he turned 1, I remember my wife and I prohibited him from touching this one electrical socket that he was always trying to touch. And I remember since then, every time he passed by that socket, he would just stop, he would freeze and look at it, and he was almost mesmerized by it. And he would look back at me to see what I was going to do, but he would just stand there and look back and forth, and it just absolutely baffled me how an 11-month-old was so drawn toward that which was prohibited. And it just a lot to think about, you know. It's incredible how, despite any external influence, despite anything like that, there's that magnetism almost within him to do that which he was told not to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments? One of the things when people, let me start over. One of the things that you're going to hear from people when you teach or talk on this kind of subject is you're going to hear people bring up children probably more than any other thing. Why? My friend had a child who died at 5, was hit by a car. Somebody asked me something, I think it was like that recently. Somebody asked me when I was teaching, recently, about a year ago, my brother had a child who was killed by a car when he was 5. Why did God let that happen? Why did God let this 4-year-old die of cancer and so on? And the question I would come back, and remember how I've been pushing, how would the universe work like that? And here's the first thing that I point out to people now. Well, it's not really, when they say, why did God let this 5-year-old get struck by a car? I now take them in a rather different direction, and that is to say, well, you're not just concerned about that one 5-year-old, right? I mean, it isn't just, because lots of 5-year-olds have been struck by cars. So it isn't just that 5-year-old. You're not just concerned about this particular 5-year-old, but you don't care about other 5-year-olds, right? I mean, I don't care if other 5-year-olds are struck by cars, but I want to know why God let this one get struck by a car. Well, nobody's going to go there, right? So really, the issue is, why does God let children get struck by cars, right? That's really the issue. But it's not just cars, is it? Keep pushing it with them a little bit. It's not just cars, is it? Why should God let children get cancer? But it's not just cancer, is it? Why does God let children get molested? Well, it's not just molestation, and it's not, well, why does God let children fall out of trees or get electrocuted? Or why does God, in other words, why does God let children come to harm? And if you push it, that's really the underlying thing. Why does God let children come to harm? And my question back now is, to what age should children be indestructible? Because that's what they're saying. Think about it. Push this issue. To what age should children be indestructible until? Until they're one day old. Of course, everybody wants children that are going to be more indestructible beyond just the first day. Well, 1 year old, okay, no child should be able to be hurt by anything until they're a year old. 10 years old? Well, we're not going to be satisfied by that, are we? I mean, we don't want 11-year-olds, hit by cars. I mean, certainly nobody here is so callous as to go, well, I don't want a 10-year-old to be hit by a car, but an 11-year-old could be hit by a car. That would be okay, right? Nobody's going to say that, are they? Well, 21 years old then, they're going to be indestructible until they're 21? Well, I mean, so at 22 they can be hit by cars? Notice the problem that you have here is you begin to pull it apart. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Also, what would a parent learn with an indestructible child? What does a parent learn about parenting? Let's suppose children were indestructible until 10 years old. They're indestructible. What kind of parenting do you need to do until the 10th year? Really, because the child can't get hurt. Prashantha just brought the example of his child being very interested in the electrical socket. Well, hey, give him 2 knives, let him stick it in both sides at once. Because if he can't get hurt, right, he can't get hurt. The trouble is, one day if that child is destructible, what has he learned about the nature of the universe? Has he learned the word hot through experience? Because that seems like something everybody learns through experience, right? Whoa, that's hot. You learn that through experience. He never learned that, really. He never learned. How does a parent learn to be a parent? When you begin to pull it apart, it just simply doesn't make any sense. And as I've told you before, natural laws must work in regular ways if our actions are to mean anything at all. Natural laws must work in regular ways if our actions are going to mean anything at all.
Dr. Jones, how do you explain the various degrees in pain? Say, for example, we tend to react in a different way. If a child of 10 years old dies of cancer, and a 10 years old man dies of cancer, we tend to react in different ways. People do that. How do you respond to that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand, Jacob.
If a child who's 10 dies of cancer,
Yeah.
and there's another person who dies of cancer who is 95, we tend to react in a different way.
Okay, yeah, sure we do, because the 95-year-old, his life's up anyway.
Yeah.
The 10-year-old had this full life waiting for him. So
how do we respond to those 2 degrees of pain, or pain at different levels? When people say that, okay, God can avoid orange is evil, as it's said.
well, again, what do? We say God shouldn't allow 10-year-olds to die? No one should be able to die until they're 95. How do we arrange, again, when somebody brings up something like that, how are you going to arrange the universe so that it still works? But we're not going to let children die at 10. How do we, I had this one woman, children should not be able to be molested, period. Think about how do you arrange a universe to work like that? So a guy comes over and he grabs the child, and what? His hands freeze immediately? I'm not being silly here. I'm not playing games here. How does it work? I can't get the child. How does it work? The child is all of a sudden given superhuman power and runs away, knocks him down. The police always immediately arrive on the scene. How do you actually run a universe with free beings and keep children from getting hurt? I don't think you do. I don't know how you make that kind of a universe.
And even emotional pain too, like divorce. I mean, if you want to prevent divorce, you have to prevent mom and the dad from their free will of being divorced.
Thank you for bringing that up. Just to make sure this gets on camera, the question was asked, what about emotional pain? Indeed. Well, we shouldn't let parents divorce then. Now you begin to see the skeptic, whoa. So, we can't, because how much damage is done to children through parents divorcing? Now the skeptic goes, whoa, hey, no, whoa, you can't stop that kind of free will. We got to keep going. But don't you see, by the way, that Jeannie, and as I mentioned, we took in kids that were molested. Believe me, we have an understanding of this. We had them live with us for years. And Jeannie and I find this a very difficult subject. But one of the reason a lot of kids are molested, frankly, is because of divorce. Because parents divorce and the husband is gone, now he's out with some new young thing, and mom has the girls, and mom has a new boyfriend come in, and the boyfriend looks at these, let's say, 11 and 13-year-olds, and they're not his kids, and they're looking good. Well, you realize that a lot of this damage has been done because of divorce. Should we then just simply outlaw divorce? How does the world work? And so thank you for that, Jordan. That's exactly, just keep pushing it. Well, because it's not just physical pain, right? It's emotional pain, it's every kind of pain. How do we keep children from getting hurt? I don't think you're going to be able to construct a world with free beings that begins to make any sense and prevent children from suffering at the same time. You just can't do it. You'd end up with a cartoonish kind of world where every time something begins to happen to a child, it's just thwarted. But then, of course, it's just not, it's just not the world that we know anymore. Yes?
Yeah, I work in a hospital and we have pediatric ward, and we've had children that had no sensory perception of physical pain, and that was the complete disaster.
Yeah.
In terms of protecting them. And in our psychiatric ward, we've had people, children and adults, that had not a lot of sensory perception of emotional pain, and that is equally a disaster. And then to push that to a certain limit, then we have to actually institutionalize to protect them.
Well, indeed, there's a lot of learning experiences then that go on with pain, aren't there? There's a lot of learning experiences that go on that we get from pain. And to just simply take it out of the world, the world's not going to work as we know it. Yes?
Are these questions ultimately rooted in the fact that people deny the existence of God and they use this as a means to not want to believe because they don't have the presupposition that he doesn't exist? And maybe they try to use supposedly whether it be emotional, intellectual barriers to believing, so the root would be arriving at that point, because even if you tell them something like this, they already understand or maybe don't want to accept the fact that God exists.
Yeah, the answer to that's yes and no. And by that I mean, for some it's true and for some it's not. Some people really are going, I don't get it, and they haven't thought it through. But for others, it's like, they're not ever going to get it because they don't want there to be a God. So yeah, you're going to find both. I would never assume that everybody's the same. You're going to have people coming. That's why whenever you're dealing with a skeptic, you need to be very careful to understand where the skeptic's coming from and not just do a one-size-fits-all kind of response to them. So a couple more comments about children. Free beings can hurt other free beings, and God can't fix everything and still give free beings or give beings or creatures free will. And from this, though, we're learning the horror of rebellion. And by that I mean Adam and Eve's rebellion against God. And we talked about why we suffer for Adam's sin, our first session together, our first 3 hours together. But we're learning something valuable here. And what we're learning, once you connect the suffering in the world ultimately to sin and rebellion against God, you connect basically all of it in one way or another to sin and rebellion against God, then sin and rebellion against God starts to look pretty ugly, doesn't it? And I think it's very interesting because when God created the universe, when he created humans, he said, don't eat from this tree. Well, they did eat from the tree. And now you have basically people saying, well, God shouldn't make these rebels' lives so difficult. I don't see the moral onus, frankly, upon God that he needs to treat rebels gently. I don't, hey, I'm not going to make your life difficult. I think instead he says, if you want to go your own way, fine, I'm going to back off and let you do it. Go ahead. Here's what life basically with me hands off looks like. Knock yourselves out, you see. I'm going to back off and I'm going to let you have the world that you want, and that's the world where you're not having to do my every command, and here we are. And it's a mess. Let's move on just briefly to animals, because of course the scripture says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. That's Bambi's dad there. By the way, I think you saw it in the Feinberg text, but philosophers actually do use Bambi. Basically, they don't call him Bambi most of the time, but they talk about the fawn in the forest that it dies, and it's a common. And this is a common thing that's brought up what we're talking about is gratuitous evil regarding animals. We just talked about what's called gratuitous evil regarding children, and now we're talking about what's called gratuitous evil regarding animals. Just think about this. Well, God shouldn't let animals be injured. It's not fair that animals should suffer. Why, by the way? The reason I say that animals should suffer, I think you've already got it. Adam and Eve sinned. God removed them from the rejuvenating power of the tree of life, but before that he cursed the ground, enabling all kinds of evil, so that the world that we live in is no longer under God's, we're now in a world of suffering and horror and rebellion, and we're reaping the results of it. But how could God arrange the world? How could God arrange the world such that animals never suffered without and have the world still make any sense at all? How does that work? Does he just put a coating, if a forest fire goes out, does he just coat every animal with something like asbestos kind of thing where they don't ever get hurt ever? Does he just transport them with a transporter to another place in a hurry, and then how does that work, that animals don't get hurt? And a lot of, especially this is fire season, a lot of fires are started by humans. How does he do that? How does he keep them from how would he work that out that we wouldn't there's miracles every time you can't hurt an animal? Right? You go up to hurt an animal, and it's just like we said with a child. I mean, it's like you can't do it. If you want to stab one, your arm stops, or you try to light a match to start a fire, and it won't light, and you go, okay, I'll get my cigarette lighter, and it doesn't work, and you've got, you're a plumber, and you've got a torch in your car. The torch. I mean, how do you do that? And then, really, I just emphasize to you, if you begin to pull this apart and say, how would the world work like that? I think you're going to find that it just simply doesn't. And so I really encourage you, push this when people say, well, God should have made the world differently and still allow free will. I just push it. Ron.
So we have a world in which man is free to exercise what he wants to do, and what you have illustrated, God has, in a sense, said, okay, I take hands off.
In a sense, yeah.
But nevertheless, he is deterministic about the things that swirl around us, and we have free choice in doing good or doing bad in those situations, which would be a compatibilist kind of.
Which I'm not, of course. I'm not a compatibilist, yeah.
But it seems to make to make. And in a sense, then has our omnipotent God limited himself by this tension between these things and his own character to necessarily have a world where he can't do certain things?
Huh?
So that we can do what we want to do? And
Well, does God, in a sense, limit himself right now? Well, in the sense that he's not insisting that his will be done 100% on earth right now. Yeah, of course he's limiting himself all the time. He's letting these free beings run amok.
and it's consistent with something in his character.
Well, it's consistent with the desire to it's consistent with God allowing beings to have free will, even though they will use it wrongly, because free will is valuable.
Okay. And so when they do use it wrongly, it's their dime.
When they use their free will wrongly, it's their fault.
It's their fault.
God didn't make them use it wrongly. God didn't make beings use their free will wrongly. Well, that wouldn't be free will, would it? You can't make someone freely do something. Of course, we're already past that. One of the things that I'm always pointing out to people is you can't create beings with free will and not allow them to choose evil. You understand? It doesn't get more logical than this, right? You haven't created a free being at all if you don't allow the free being to use it wrongly. Or this is just pure logic. I don't know any atheists that disagree with that. Well, many atheists are determinists, and so they might take that in a different direction. But basically, you haven't created a free being if the free being can't exercise it in the wrong manner. And this is, anyway. So, but when it comes to animals, it's similar to children. How was God going to arrange a universe where people could act freely, but these beings would never come to harm?
So why doesn't God, well certainly, okay, we get it, the things so far hopefully, but God could still demonstrate his power more often than he does. The short answer to that is God doesn't want to interfere with our wills. Now think about this just for a minute. God could have arranged the universe such that every time we looked up through the ceiling, we saw a giant flaming sword. Every time we go, whoa, there's a giant flaming sword. And we knew that if we ever disobeyed God, that giant flaming sword would cut us in half. God could have made the universe like that, right? How many people would be Christians then? All of them. How many would be worshipers? I think none. It's probably, I'm not sure you could get worshipers out of a world where God has, every time you look at it, whoa, there's a giant flaming sword. You're not going to get, I don't think you're going to get real worshipers out of that.
Also, the story of the Exodus demonstrates to us that jaw-dropping or mind-blowing displays of power or miracles don't necessarily constitute faith or obedience.
True. You're absolutely right. God could have made Christianity, think about this, God could have made Christianity such that every time anyone that became a Christian, you were never sick again, ever. Never sick. He could have made Christianity so that, you were never hurt, you're never sick. Well, again, how many people would be Christians? I think you'd have, maybe not all of them, hey, I can take a cold now and then, or the flu, but you'd have a lot of people becoming Christians. He could have made Christianity into where you were kind of like, whoa, you're taking a drug. And like, whoa, Christianity's good. No, look, you got to know it's good, dude. No matter what happens, you're like, whoa, no, Christianity, no, it's good. Well, how many people, especially if you combine them, you never got sick, and no matter what happened, you're like, whoa, no, it's good, loving it. No, this Christian thing, try it, it's good. I think everybody'd be a Christian, especially if you combine those two. Whoa, dude, no, have some. Everybody'd be a Christian. How many, again, would be worshipers? I don't think that leads to worshipers.
Jesus did have an opportunity when people, Pharisees came and asked him, should we pay tax to the Caesar? If he had said, no, don't pay, the world would follow him because we didn't have to then pay any taxes.
Right. That's true.
So-
That's true. Whoa, that's good. Christians don't pay taxes. Woo! Or they kill them all. Now I'm going to, moving along, how much power did God show Satan? That's actually a very interesting question. And by the way, Paradise Lost is actually a theodicy. And the question, or the comment that Satan makes after he's put down by God, basically, the rebellion is quelled by God, he says, you didn't reveal how much power you had, is his complaint in Paradise Lost. You weren't playing all your cards. We didn't know you were going to be so powerful. God actually wants, now this is when you first hear this, when some people first hear this, they think this is just, it almost seems unfair. It's not unfair. God, listen very carefully, God wanted to create a world with epistemic distance. That's the big phrase, epistemic distance. Now, epistemology, as you know, is the knowledge of how we, or the study of how we know things. But God does not want his power and knowledge of him to be too readily present, basically for the reasons that I've just mentioned. I mean, we could walk through the world and go, whoa, there's God. Yes, he is. There he is. And all his power and all his glory. And if he wants the giant flaming sword to come upon us, it will. He could have made the world that way, but that actually interferes with free will. Because you start going, yeah, you and me. We're like, well, you become, frankly, like the people in the town Anthony, the little boy Anthony in Twilight Zone. You know, it was like, you're a good boy, Anthony. I mean, everybody wants to kill Anthony, frankly, at this point, even his own parents. But they can't. And so you're a good boy, Anthony. It's exactly the same kind of thing.
So are you saying that epistemic distance was even probably a pre-fall issue?
You mean pre-fall of Satan?
Pre-fall of man.
I don't know. I don't think there. What kind of epistemic distance there was? We know that God wasn't there all the time because they felt like they could even hide from it. So that's a good question, Prashant. And frankly, I've not thought about how much epistemic distance there was pre-fall. It's a good question. I will ponder it though, because that, my brothers and sisters in Christ, is the kind of question that I think is worth pondering. Just what would that be like? How much? We know that God wasn't there all the time. Apparently, he was walking in the garden. What does that mean? He didn't show himself on a fiery throne. But I don't, of course, we'd be speculating largely. But it's the kind of question that's worth thinking through as much as we can. Let me read you. This is one of the things that bothered me as a younger Christian. I was troubled by why God isn't showing his power more often than he does. I'm going to actually read you an entire chapter, they're short, from the Screwtape Letters. And you'll remember that the Screwtape Letters was about a senior tempter named Screwtape who was writing to a junior tempter named Wormwood on how to tempt Christians. And this is on why doesn't God make his power more known. This was incredibly helpful to me. He said, so Screwtape writes, my dear Wormwood, you must have often wondered why the enemy, now remember the enemy's God, because everything's reversed, why the enemy does not make more use of his power to be sensibly present to human souls in any degree he chooses at any moment. But you now see that the irresistible and the indisputable are the two weapons which the very nature of his scheme forbids him to use. Merely to override a human will, as his felt presence in any but the faintest and most mitigated degree would certainly do, would be for him useless. He cannot ravish, he can only woo. For his noble idea is to eat his cake and have it. The creatures are to be one with him, but yet themselves. Merely to cancel them or assimilate them will not serve. He's prepared to do a little overriding at the beginning. He will set them off with communications of his presence which, though faint, seem great to them, with emotional sweetness and easy conquest over temptation. But he never allows that state of affairs to last long. sooner or later he withdraws, if not in fact, at least from their conscious experience, all those supports and incentives. He leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. It is during such trough periods, much more than peak periods, that it is growing into the sort of creature he wants it to be. Hence the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. We can drag our patients along by continually tempting, because we design them only for the table, and the more their will is interfered with, the better. But he cannot tempt to virtue as we do to vice. He wants them to learn to walk with him, and must therefore take away his hand, and if only the will to walk is really there, he's pleased even with their stumbles. Do not be deceived, Wormwood. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy's will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he's been forsaken, and still obeys. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. That is spot on. Again, Lewis has hit it out of the park. I love the last line. I basically have to memorize. You know, our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy's will, looks around upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he's been forsaken and still obeys. That is, wow. See, how does that happen? God, if he constantly gave, and I think the line where Lewis says, if even this, you know, he has to, if hardly any of his presence is sensed at all, it would be almost overwhelming to us. So he really gives us very, very little. And lessons are learned in that are not learned in times where his presence is clearly seen. Richard Swinburne, the philosopher of Oxford, put it this way. He says, if God is to allow us to acquire knowledge by learning from experience, and above all to allow us to choose whether to acquire knowledge at all, or even to allow us to have a very well justified knowledge of the consequences of our actions, knowledge which we need if we are to be free and have a free and efficacious choice between good and bad, he needs to provide natural evils occurring in regular ways in consequence of natural processes. Or rather, he needs to do this if he is not to give us too much evidence, or to give us too evident an awareness of his presence. Swinburne is correct there. If God demonstrates his power frequently, then we're all going to go, there really is a God in the universe. And then you start getting, the more evidence he gives, the more that he does that, what happens? Then everybody becomes a Christian. Oh no, we're all Christians. Sure we are. No, we all are. Yeah, right. No, we are. It's just like, yeah, that was very good, Anthony. It was good that you did that. You know, I mean, that's the kind of beings that you would end up with. So he withdraws, and here we are. People will say to me, I always think it's interesting to say, well, why? For instance, now we could use this newest hurricane with Hurricane Sandy, but people would say, why did God allow Hurricane Katrina? And I think, well, that's got to be the easiest of all. We built a city below sea level with walls that we knew could only withstand a hurricane up to Category 3, when we know hurricane categories 4 and 5 already existed. So we built a city below sea level with protection that was inadequate to respond to a threat that was already common to our experience. In other words, we blew it. But, and Solomon puts it though, in Proverbs 19:3, when a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. You understand? When a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. We make a mistake, we blow it, things fall apart, we go, I'm mad at God. Well, you know what? This is man's folly. We built a city below sea level that could not withstand the threat that we already knew existed. And then when indeed it happens as we, you know, as it was bound to, we go, oh, how could God do such a thing? Well, he didn't build the city below sea level. interesting verse, Isaiah 45:15. Truly you are a God who hides himself. O God of Israel, the Savior. Truly you are a God who hides himself. He doesn't want his presence to be too readily known because, well, it simply doesn't accomplish other purposes that are more valuable to him. How about, okay, next one, number 7, couldn't God give us free will but teach us some other way? There had to be another way. And this is one of the big ones where skeptics will say, there had to, oh, come on. There had to be another way. And my response to that is always this, I go, what do you got? I'm all ears. What is it? You got the other way. What's the other way? I'm listening. What is it? This one of my students actually, 24, young brash fellow, this is some years ago, he started getting mad at me because I wasn't just telling him. He said, no, there had to be another way. And I said, what do you got? Hold on, listening. What is it? No, come on, there had to be another way. Well, what? No, suggest it. See, that's a cop-out. Do not allow the skeptic to just go, well, there had to be another way. Say, I'll keep free will in that, keep keep human free will going on, and our actions meaning things, where natural laws, happen in consequence of, so that our actions mean things. And tell me exactly how you're going to teach us some other way. And I think we have this as an example. See, we have children are really a microcosm of what's going on in the larger kingdom. Children are a microcosm of what's going on in the larger universe, really. And that is, I look at these girls here in this slide, who one of them is either drunk or is about to be very drunk. And I go, certainly, hopefully, their parents say, you don't want to, have somebody hook a tube up to your mouth and a funnel and just start pouring alcohol down. It's really not a good thing to do, right? I mean, presumably the parents did that. I decided not to show it because I don't know who these people are. I always wonder if I'm teaching someplace and somebody's going to go, well, that's me. That'll be interesting. Whoa! Or else other people will be going, hey, isn't that you? But, aren't you that girl with anyway. Yeah, that's my friend. Oh, well. I decided not to show it because I don't, because we know who she is. But I've got a picture of Jenna Bush, who seems to turn into a fine young woman. Of Jenna Bush, who's falling down drunk, holding a cigarette on another co-ed at her university sorority party thing. Falling down drunk on top of her. And my comment is, do you not think that George and Barbara Bush, when they were president of the United States, didn't tell Jenna Bush, you really don't want to fall down drunk. Well, of course I wouldn't put it that way, but you want to be very careful with your behavior because somebody's going to snap a photo of it and it's going to be on the front page of the National Enquirer, which it was. You don't think they had that conversation? Of course they did. Did it make the difference? Obviously not. You see my point? It didn't make the difference. And so when people say, people go, well, he should have done it another way. What do you got? What's the other way? Perhaps he should have given us a book or a movie to tell us that we shouldn't do these things. Well, he already gave us a book. We don't pay attention to the book. Well, what about a movie? I mean, what's going to do it? And isn't the whole point of parenting, especially when your kids become teens, of going, don't do this, it's going to be bad. And believe me, with the girls that we had, oh man, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, trying to convince them, don't do this, it's going to be bad. It's just, and sure enough, some of them went out and went as far as they possibly could with like I said, sex and drugs, and you name it. And you just go, oh, what a disaster. And some of them have had abortions, and some of them have had, one of them had like 6 kids by the time she was 24. Yeah.
And that is after growing up with parents right there who don't have epistemic distance.
Right. And they're going, this is going to really hurt you, don't do it. And you do I remember when I was walking by, because you're always trying to teach object lessons, right? So we're walking by and they happen to have in this bookstore, this is back when they had bookstores, for those of you that are younger, and they used to have what we call bookstores. Anyway, But anyway, we actually walked by this in this bookstore, and there was a big picture book of Marilyn Monroe, and right next to it was a big picture book of Elvis Presley. And so I took one of my girls, who is a Facebook friend to this day, and I said, now, notice these two people here. She was a famous actress and considered, a sex symbol. She killed herself with drugs, and he was called the king, and like one of the greatest singers, some would say maybe the greatest singer like ever, and he overdosed with drugs and killed himself. Do you think there's a message there about drugs? Trying to, they still use drugs. But anyway, bottom line, my friends, is experience happens to be a really good teacher. And if we're not going to take God's word for it, then we're going to learn the hard way. In fact, that one girl, I used to say to her all the time, I'd say, there's two ways of learning things, isn't there? She'd say yes, and I'd say, what's the easy way? I'm not going to use her name. I said, what's the easy way? And she'd say, to take advice. And I'd say, what's the hard way? Through experience. But see, we don't. We didn't believe God. Adam and Eve didn't believe God. Frankly, in our own lives, the lives of you and I here, let's face it, we haven't believed God sometimes, have we? And we've done the things that He's forbidden. And if you're a Christian, you've gone, that was bad. That turned out to be a big mistake. Now, this is how He teaches us. So couldn't He teach us some other way? Again, what do you got? I'm all ears. What is it that teaches? And like I said, bring up the teenage thing. How do you, just try it on teenagers, okay? Last one, couldn't God give us free will, but isn't He still responsible for evil? In other words, the argument here is, okay, yeah, I see your point, but God didn't have to create all these beings, and so in some sense then, isn't God still responsible for evil anyway? Several things about this. One, this is just a variation of should God have created beings with free will. That's really all it is. It's just a variation of should God have created beings with free will. Two, God is no more responsible for the evil deeds of His creation than a parent is responsible for the evil deeds of their children simply because they gave birth to them. Think about it. And I love to push this when people bring this kind of thing up, and I'm in an audience. I love Q&A, by the way. It's I enjoy that, I think, when I'm speaking in front of like a church, which I've done several, Houston and Bend, Oregon, in just the last 4 weeks. But I love Q&A. It's one of my favorite times. And people will often bring this kind of stuff up, and I go, well, maybe God should just not have created. My response to that is, oh, I see. Did you have children? Or do you want to have children? And the answer is basically either yes or yes, or haven't yet, but I want to. Well, look, think about this just for a minute. You know very well, and I mean all of you know very well, that your children could grow up to hate your guts, right? You do know that. I mean, you didn't miss that, that's true, right? Because what? And I mean, some parents that seem relatively good, their children grew up to basically hate their guts. You know very well that in having children, some of them could grow up to be criminals. Why? Because some very good parents, apparently, their kids grew up to be criminals. Some of them could even become murderers. Well, then the question I have to ask you, if you know that this is at least possible, that your children could grow up to be hateful, murdering thugs, then don't have children, right? But nobody ever does that. Nobody, oh yeah, I don't think I've ever had a, potential parent ever say, yeah, okay, you're right, I'm not going to have kids because one of them might become a murderous thug. I mean, there might be some out there, but basically people still go, I still want children. Because we like having free beings around, don't we? We like having free beings around because they're valuable. And so God created free beings, and here we are. And I don't think God is any more responsible for in some sense, yeah, God could have chosen not to create free beings at all. But if God wanted to have free beings around, then here we are, and this is what we're learning. Okay. we're now done with this. We're going to move on to the next section. We now come to our final section for tonight, free will in heaven. After some introductory comments, I'm going to point out 7 reasons that we can have free will in heaven and yet not sin. Namely, there will be no world, there will be no flesh, there will be no devil. Hell will be an eternal reminder to free beings of the horror of sin. Hell will be an eternal reminder to free beings of the horror of rebellion. We are learning lessons here that are preparing us to not want to sin in heaven. We're going to learn further lessons at the judgment, which will reveal to us the horror and stupidity of sin. And finally, we will live by sight. The first question, or the first introductory wise comment, is will there be free will in heaven? Is there going to be free will in heaven? Well, this is only slightly speculative. There's either going to be free will in heaven or there isn't. Right? There's only 2 possibilities. It's not like there's a million of them. But I would point out to you that there's already been free will in heaven, isn't there? Because God obviously values free will. And this has got to be one of the most amazing verses in the entire Scripture. And I'm really serious, as you're driving home tonight, here's another thing just to think about. As you know, throughout the class I've been encouraging you, just think through some of these principles that we've discussed. Turn off the TV and just think more deeply about them. Think about these words, these 6 words. And there was war in heaven. Think about the significance of those 6 words. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. They were physically thrown out of heaven. Think about the significance of that. Obviously free will is valuable to God if He creates free beings, and this can happen. So I submit to you that there will be free will in heaven, and yet we won't sin. How's that possible? Oh, I didn't read the rest of the verse. It says, and the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So how is it possible then that we could have free will in heaven but not sin? I've now made 7 points. First, there will be no world. I like this one, temptation. And underneath it says, do you really want to spend the rest of your life wondering? It just says, kind of reminds me of Prashant's child, which is his experience, of course, as well. I think everybody's dealing with. Do not push button. It's like, what would happen if I pushed that button? There was a TV series that's now gone where this was one button that they had to push every, 60 minutes or something like that. What would happen if you don't push it? But anyway. There will be no world. See, we will not, the world that we know, that frankly, where you're one click away from porn, that world will no longer exist. That'll be gone. So it says in Revelation 21:1, then I saw new heavens and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. New heaven and a new earth. There will be no flesh. That's a great photo to me of just yearning desire, fleshly desire. It's not too risque. So it covers all the bases. Anyway, we're not going to have the bodies that we have now, that just have urges that are they're Adamic urges, frankly. We want stuff, and often we just shouldn't have it. Your body itself, I'm not talking about your mind, but your body, whether you have sex with your own spouse or someone else's, your body doesn't care very much, you understand? Your mind may care. Hopefully your mind desperately cares, but your body doesn't care terribly. Your body doesn't care whether the food you're eating is stolen or properly purchased. Hopefully your mind desperately cares, but your body doesn't. Our bodies are going to be changed. We won't have the same, it won't be similar to what we have now. 1 Peter 4:1 says, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking, for whoever suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. One day your bodies, we are all going to cease from sin. Third, there will be no more devil. He'll be in hell, right? So the devil who is out causing evil, encouraging evil, trying to get people to do evil, who is at war, by the way, right now against the saints, he won't be around anymore, right? It says in Matthew 13:41, the Son of Man will be sent out as angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil, and they will throw them into the fiery furnace, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There will be no more devil and his minions. They'll be gone. And hell will be an eternal reminder to free beings of the horror of rebellion, won't it? Now think about it. I mean, one of the things about hell existing forever that we really haven't talked about much, we did 3 hours on the destiny of the unevangelized and the fairness of hell. We did 3 hours on that subject. But one of the things that I didn't mention that is one of the benefits of hell in that lecture was that hell's an eternal reminder to free beings of the horror of sin, isn't it? The fact that it goes on to forever. If it just ceased to exist, if it was annihilationism, you were just annihilated, then what, 89 million years from now, what do you do? Think back and go, there once was a place called hell where people were annihilated almost immediately. Isn't quite the deterrent, is it, of having hell so big there? I suspect, by the way, the speculation, that if we wanted to, we could go and view the occupants of hell just like Lazarus did with the rich man, and kind of go, whoa, there he is, man. Here are the same old arguments and the same old selfish way of thinking. We talked about Lazarus and the rich man when we had our lecture on hell and the destiny of the evangelist, fairness of hell. And then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to the eternal life. And you remember when we talked on hell in our last meeting. This is just part of the picture that Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother, was looking at, and this was a section that was really got his attention, where he's looking at these people and go, these people are going to hell, said Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother. And then he says his whole life and all the things he'd done wrong just scrolled before him, just went before his mind really fast. And he thought, I'm going to hell. Thankfully, he repented, unlike his brother, Peter Hitchens, and stopped being an atheist and started following Jesus. You know, he says he used to mock pictures like this. But anyway, hell will be an eternal reminder to free beings of the horror of rebellion. Number 5, lessons learned here are preparing us. Lessons learned here are preparing us to be able to be fit inhabitants of the kingdom of heaven and yet not sin. Let me illustrate this by a passage from Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 39. It says, as for you, O house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says, go and serve your idols, every one of you, but afterward you will surely listen to me and no longer profane my holy name with your gifts and idols. Then you will know that I am the Lord when I bring you into the land of Israel, the land that I had sworn with uplifted hand to give to your fathers. There you will remember your conduct and all your actions by which you defiled yourselves, and you will loathe yourselves for all the evil you've done. You will know that I am the Lord when I deal with you for my name's sake, and not according to your evil ways and your corrupt practices, O house of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. What's he saying right there? I am going to let you go off and defile yourselves with sin. So that what? After you've done so, you're going to go, wow, that was really icky, right? I feel like garbage. Isn't that what it's saying right here? And then you will loathe yourselves for all the evil that you've done. That's one of the major things going on in this world, is we are learning the horror of rebellion. In a debate, Bill Craig was debating Ray Bradley and said, William Lane Craig said, Ray Bradley said, you're saying in effect that when I characterize heaven as a possible world in which everybody freely receives Christ, I'm wrong insofar that as that had to be preceded by this actual world, this world of veil of tears and woe in which people are sinful and the like, and Bill Craig responded, I'm saying that it may not be feasible for God to actualize heaven in isolation from what's such an antecedent world, which is just another way of saying that we needed this world for heaven to exist, where people choose freely not to sin against God ever again. This world needed to exist first. And I got this from Dallas Willard, this analogy, but Dallas Willard was in class. Well, we'll skip that. I'll just do it myself. How many of you, and some of you heard my lecture during, last summer or so. Anyway, how many of you would like to see me jab this pen into my eye right now? I could do it. I could jab this pen, I could just jab it right into my eye. I could do it. I could do it. Would you like to see it? Well, thankfully nobody spoke up and said yes. But I'm not going to jab this pen into my eye. Do you know why I'm not going to jab this pen into my eye? Because I'm too smart for that. That would be a very, very stupid thing to do, wouldn't it? How stupid it would be for me to jab a pen into my eye. That would be stupid. Because, and I'll bet you, if I live to be, in fact, bet, 1 trillion years from now, assuming my mental capacity is stable 1 trillion years from now, but if I live 1 trillion years from now and to have an equal mental capacity that I do now, I'm not going to intentionally jab a pen into my eye. Because I've learned that that's a stupid thing to do. Now, we don't give pens to babies. Why? Because they jab it right in their eye. Right? They don't know better. They'd stick that pen right in their eye and it would be you. But we know better. And I'm suggesting to you very simply that what we're learning here about sin is that sin is stupid. And when there's no world, no flesh, no devil, those are all gone. Hell's an eternal reminder to free beings. And we've learned here that sin really is just a really, really stupid thing to do. I mean, frankly, there's a lot of other sins that I've learned. They're just too stupid to commit, frankly. I mean, they're just too stupid. I'm not going to commit them. There's some sins, unfortunately, that I still need some further education on, but I'm learning. You see. J.P. Moreland, less eloquently, put it, why don't we run outside right now onto the lawn and eat a big steaming pile of dog food? I love that name, J.P. Moreland, less eloquently, by the way. I love that. But why don't we run outside right now and eat a steaming pile of dog? It'd just be stupid. It's just stupid. Maybe what I'm contending with you is that sin, we're learning here that sin is stupid. We're learning here that sin is stupid. And we're going to further learn this. See, our lesson isn't just done here. We're going to further learn this lesson at the judgment. Why? Because what's going to happen in the judgment? For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, and each one may receive what is due him for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. So we're all going to appear, and that's Christians too, by the way, for the judgment seat of Christ. That we're going to receive what is due for the things we've done in the body. Matthew 12, 36 and 37, Jesus said, I tell you, on that day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Now, that's going to be interesting when all the creatures of the universe have to give an account for what they've said. That's going to be quite an education, isn't it? Matthew 10:26 says, so have no fear of them, and that is, Jesus was talking about persecutors, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. And so don't be afraid that what a persecutor does to you, whether it is to hurt you physically, or just maybe you'll lose a job, or you'll lose your reputation. Jesus, don't worry about that, because it's all going to be revealed. The last day, what they did wrong to you, is all going to come out. So, when you put this together, in fact, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1, it says, so the men ought to regard us as servants of Christ, as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given trust must prove faithful. But then down a little bit farther, down I think in the 5th verse, he says, so judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord returns. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and expose the motives of men's hearts. Notice, and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive his praise from God. Now, that's going to be quite an education. And you're going to be there, along with every other being in the universe.
How long is that going to take?
A while. It's going to take,
That won't be an issue.
let's say, it'll be more than an hour long. How long, I don't know. But, I mean, exactly how this works, I don't know. But it's going to be quite an education.
You have all eternity.
Well, it won't take eternity. It won't take eternity, but there's going to be quite an education there, isn't there, about the horror of rebellion. And I think one of the most interesting things, by the way, isn't going to be that we're going to understand the motives of wicked things that people have done, because we kind of get those. But one of the things when you see non-Christians get out there that have done all these quote-unquote good things, and their motives are exposed, oh baby. But we're going to learn. We're learning here the horror of rebellion, and we're going to further learn the horror of rebellion in the judgment.
So what happens to the sins that are, the iniquities that are not remembered? I will forgive their iniquity and I will remember their
When
sin.
it comes to the believer's sin, I am not suggesting that every believer's sin is going to be revealed in the judgment. Because I don't think that's the case, because of verses like the one you just brought up. I don't think every believer's sin. Certainly all the unbelievers' sins are going to be revealed. Because it's not, you mentioned that one verse, there's also Isaiah 1:18, come let us reason together, says the Lord, though your sins are scarlet, they'll be white as snow, they'll be red like crimson, they'll become like wool. So far, as far as the east is from the west, so far does he cast our transgression from us. Now the believer's works will be judged. We know that in 1 Corinthians, where it says, be careful with what you build on the foundation. Some are building with gold and silver and precious stones, others are building with wood, hay, and stubble. He says, what the other will be burned. But then he says something that's actually very encouraging. He says, that person will be saved, but only as through the fire. In other words, everything he did, they're going to go, well, you didn't do hardly anything good at all. The person will still be saved, but that's not the same thing as having all your sins one by one publicly exposed. You see what I'm saying? Enumerated. I don't think that's what the word means.
And the good thing about those things that's mentioned there is that everything that burns is above the ground. And rest two things are under the ground. So it's not revealed. Rest, whatever everyone does to show off and to do, good works, with wrong motives will be burned away. Then that which is hidden and people don't know about, that will remain.
Final last one. We will live by sight. Number 7, we will live by sight. Dear friends, 1 John 3:2 and 3, it says, dear friends, now we are the children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we will see him as he is. Everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself as he is pure. When you see him, we're going to go, that's the way I live. And there's something about being, that we're no longer going to be living behind this dark, seeing through glass dark, that we're going to be seen face to face. But still, I guess what I'm saying is, just this isn't enough, because obviously Satan saw God. It wasn't enough. So what else was needed? We needed lessons learned here and at the judgment to reveal to us the horror of rebellion against God. You see what I'm saying? That's what we need. We needed I'm suggesting to you that not any one of these points is enough. But if you put them all together, it's enough. I've had once in a while, I think the Christians, there's one Christian woman walked out of my teaching and never came back. Thankfully, a friend knew why, but she was freaked out over, she says, there can't be free will in heaven because I know I'm going to blow it. No, I don't think so. I mean, any more, like I say, because we're not going to have the rampant opportunity, no world, We're not going to have a body that is like it is now, no flesh. The devil's not going to be working on us. Like I said, we're learning lessons here where we're not going to want to stick a gem pen into our eye, and then we're going to live by sight and so on. And all I can say is let's just trust Jesus that this will be sufficient. To me, the pen in the eye thing has got a lot of explanatory power, frankly. And like I said, I got that from Dallas Willard. When I first saw him doing it to the class, I'm kind of like, whoa, where's he going with this? But it made a lot of sense. Yes?
Have you, on a slightly unrelated subject, have you ever been asked the question at this point if how we could, those of us who will be with the Lord in heaven, could possibly be joyful with Him, knowing fully well that there may be many people we love who are currently now?
We talked about that in our last meeting, and my answer to that was to bring up the reporter from Le Mans who found that hijacked victims once, I think that is the lecture, right? I thought that was on the Hell lecture, but anywhere where they found that victims who survived a hijack, plane hijackers, that they divorced because once they saw who the other person really was, they didn't want to be with that person anymore. And my point to this, and I think this is, frankly, I think this is rock solid. I don't think it's speculation at all. Once you really see the hearts of family members who decided to live a life of rebellion and not submit their will to Him, and the veneer of niceness is stripped away, you're not going to want to do it. You're not going to go, I still wish I was with that person. No, you won't want to be with that person. That's what I'm saying. I think now we see the judgment's going to reveal who they really are. And when the judgment reveals who they really are, I don't think we're going to go, oh, well, I wish we could hang out with that person in heaven forever still. I don't think that's going to be happening at all. Habermas and Moreland put it, it may be that we will be able not to sin in heaven, that is, rather than not being able to sin. In this case, we would still be free to sin, but we would always choose not to, because of the glories and virtues of heaven would be so marvelous that no one in heaven would ever choose to act against those benefits. Yes, but also with the other 6 points that I mentioned. So in Revelation 1:5 and 6 it says, to Him who loves us and has freed us from our sins by His blood and has made us to be a kingdom and priests. We're really going to be kings and priests. And we're going to, our last week together, and this is the last week that they're going to actually film, but the last week together we're going to talk about what it means to reign with Christ. The next 3 weeks, only the last week will be recorded. The next 3 weeks, next week we're going to talk about your place. Where do you live the kingdom? Your person glorified, and your occupation reigning with Jesus forever. That's where all this goes. And enduring this world of hardship and suffering is preparing you to be capable, to be ready to be a glorified person who can reign over God's kingdom forever. That's what this is all about.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.